Welcome. Thank you for joining us at today's program, presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition. Home Edition consists of a series of curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. Today's episode is a collaboration between the Wignall Museum and the Chaffey College Hip Hop Studies Summit, featuring artists Jonah Elijah and Robert Newman. My name is Rebecca Trawick. I'm the director and curator of the Wignall Museum, pronouns she, her, hers. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. I want to take a moment to recognize that we're situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our recognition and respect to the elders, both past, present, and future. Next, I'm happy to introduce Adam Martinez. Adam is a Chicano musician, poet, writer, and professor of English at Chaffey College. He's also a member of the Hip Hop Studies Summit Planning Committee. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Rebecca. I want to take a moment to share a few thoughts about our dream and our vision for Chaffey's Hip Hop Studies Summit. The Chaffey College Hip Hop Studies Summit is an annual conference designed to bring together diverse scholars, students, faculty, researchers, and visual and performing artists from local communities in order to promote social justice and to celebrate African-American, Black, and Brown literacies through hip hop. Annually, we present professional community artists to instruct free workshops, participate in panel discussions, and build community, which culminates in our Hip Hop Studies Showcase, an artistic experience that includes both professional and student artists. Although we're only in our second year of existence, we've learned how powerful this experience is for our Chaffey community and the surrounding community at large. Last year, we saw people in seats, we saw participants in the workshops. We heard the positive feedback from our students about the summit and what it meant to them. Even though we're not able to bring the summit to our physical space on our Rancho campus this year, our vision and goal for the Hip Hop Studies Summit remains the same. And our transition into a virtual space is a testament to the resilience and innovation and adaptability of hip hop. We envision working together as faculty, classified staff, administration, students, and artists, both national and local, to express the power of hip hop culture. Our mission is to share knowledge of the full scope of hip hop, from DJing, MCing, dancing, street art, to the knowledge of self. Those of us that participate in its many forms know hip hop as a space of resistance, as a space of education, and as a space of Black joy. Our dream is that our African-American, Black, and Brown students and the Chaffey student body as a whole learn more about career pathways rooted in hip hop, but more importantly, that they learn knowledge of self. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Tara Johnson.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Tara Johnson, professor of fashion merchandising and design, and I am pleased to introduce Jonah Elijah. He is a Houston, Texas native, now working in Los Angeles. He received his BA in studio art from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 2017, and his MFA from Claremont Graduate University in 2020. Elijah's work encapsulates Black life in America and addresses controversial issues that actively affect the African-American community. Elijah's practice embraces discomforting realities using materials to explore economic inequality, displacement, and human rights. Being raised around lower income hardships, Elijah builds off his own personal upbringing and creates work that reflects the Black experience. Whether in his paintings or installation, Elijah layers his work with coded language, offering an abstracted and representational view of what it is like to be Black in America today. I also would like to introduce Robert Newman III. He is a New York-based artist. Newman currently works as an assistant vice president at Neuberger Berman. In 2020, Newman transitioned into the role of equity and inclusion and diversity program manager for the firm. One of his notable accomplishments and responsibilities is the role that he has been co-chairing Black History Month in 2019 and 20. Outside of the office, he spends the majority of his time working as a freelance visual artist, creating exhibitions and galleries across New York City, and serving the communities through various mentoring and art-based nonprofits. In the community, Newman is known for his work as the co-founder of Words on the Whites Movement, an arts and advocacy initiative, and Silent Renaissance, an organization dedicated to bringing people together and promoting Black art. As of 2020, Newman was appointed as the president of the Morehouse New York City Alumni Association after serving the board as director of programming and social engagement since 2018. In his role as president, he is responsible for carrying out the organization's goals of helping area alumni connect with the school, each other, and the broader New York City community.
Nice to meet you, brother.
Likewise, glad we could join the stage together.
Definitely. So to start us off, can you talk about the role of music and specifically hip hop and how that plays a part in your life?
Yeah, sure. For me, I feel like hip hop is, it might almost be synonymous with being Black. I feel like my earliest memories are, they could be curated to albums. I could think about songs like as early as Songs and Places. I spent a lot of time in my life moving around. Both of my parents were in the military, so literally places, scenes, friend groups, situations, they're all curated to this hip hop backdrop. I have albums that took me through high school, albums that were like my freshman year in college, songs that I had for like the first time I drove my car by myself, like on a long road trip. Like, I think hip hop and music, hip hop by itself and music even more broadly, I think it's kind of integral. Like it's the music that I'm listening to that helps me to express myself and understand like the world that is around me. And I think otherwise it's just like Bob Marley says, the one drug that doesn't do any harm. So that's how I feel about music. That's the role it's played. What about you? How has hip hop played a role in your life, your art, and in your inspiration process?
Man, music it pretty much plays a big role in my whole life. Like I remember like the first song I ever heard or remember, I was probably like 2, and it was Tupac's California Love. And I just remember how like that melody was getting into the back of my father's Camaro at the time. And I was like, that's like one of my earliest memories. And just yesterday, I was really, I was in my studio and I was reflecting on Saba. He's a rapper, and one of his first albums. And I was like, dang, this is like around the time I started painting, and it was kind of bringing me back to when I first was like getting into like painting and making work, and how like the album was inspiring me, and music just I feel the same. Like you hit every point I wanted to say about music, or everything you said about music. I feel the same way. Like a lot of songs and a lot of albums like really took me through high school, through college, those road trips, of course. So I feel the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like one of the earliest songs I can remember distinctly like calling out, knowing that this is something that I liked, that I was requesting, was I want to say it's Master P. It was Make 'Em Say and Silk the Shocker. Back then, I think like growing up, that was it. That's what I wanted to hear.
I remember that song specifically. I remember like in elementary school, everybody was like saying in the hallways and stuff. Everybody was like mocking Master P. So that was like a big moment too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like to keep it going, where do you find your energy and like inspiration and your drive?
I wish I could say it was one thing. And I think most of the time when I hear this question, I could kind of tell folks want to have like a magic bullet type of answer, like, it's my family, they keep me going, and they do, but I don't know. I feel like because I'm an artist and work on so many different things, the inspiration it just kind of bounces around. Like sometimes it is, like we just mentioned, the music that ends up giving me the spark. Other times I think this might be because I'm a visual artist, so I'm interested to see if this is something similar to you, but I like seeing images, like going to museums. I live in New York, so walking up and down the street, that's always a huge inspiration. Just people watching, seeing how creative folks are just in their daily life. That's always a big source of inspiration. Um, I don't think I could discount like the amount of inspiration I get from like my friend group. So I think that's one of the things that's always been uh, that I've always been kind of most intentional about. So I always try and keep like a very eclectic friend group, folks who are a little bit smarter than me, more more artistic than I am, more creative, just so I'm always like pulled along. And yeah, I know I kind of knocked it early, but yeah, definitely my family. There are some very interested and eclectic folks. So I'm on the phone constantly with my elders, my grandparents, like every other day. Check in with like my parents, my sisters. I'm the second child of 8 altogether. So really big family, always hearing from everybody. I think that's something that keeps me going as well. And like I'm always trying to have that conversation with the work. What about you?
I pretty much feel the same way. My family, my family plays a big role in my inspiration. Like just the way I was raised or how I was brought up, and like especially my siblings. Like I'm always thinking about like the times I had with them growing up on the weekends, and just like so many different things we did as kids just outside, because you know we had to always stay outside, and we couldn't come back into the house until the sun came down. So like those moments, like anything we were doing outside, those moments always like find a way back into my work, and I'm always thinking about like what exactly were we doing. And you know, inspiration, it comes from so many places. Just like you said that you're like in New York, I'm always like I live outside of LA, but I always go to LA just to like go see work or go see some shows, and sometimes just to even ride around just to find inspiration, just looking at people on the streets, just seeing how people are reacting with each other, even though it's like we're in the midst of a pandemic, but you still see people interacting, you see people at parks, and it's just those little simple things that pretty much drive me and keep me inspired.
Yeah, I think it was it might have been a quote from Picasso that said, "Inspiration exists; it just has to find you working." And I
Right.
think that's always been my kind of relationship with it. Like I think most of the time people hear, what inspires your work, and they think that the creative process is inspiration and then like this big thing that comes out. But in more more often than not, I see it as you're already working on a big thing and inspiration is coming in like throughout. So there may be days, for example, like where you have the big canvas and you might be like 3/4 through. Like the painting may not look the way you want it to, or it might be halfway there or a quarter there, but the inspiration could come in on like the last day. And as long as like you're already in the groove, like that's when I think it ends up getting applied to the work. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I hear a lot of connections between us just finding inspiration from all over. Because again, the work, it just happens in the background and you're just waiting for it to be the spark, I think.
Man, that's so true. That is so true. I'm always figuring out what the painting is gonna be. That probably in the middle of it, I just start scribbling, and I try not to like stress myself out about like what is the painting gonna be about, what is it going, like what is it gonna say, what is it gonna be, and you're right. It sometimes it really does happen on like the very last day.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh, talk about like where the value of hustle in your work as a creative person.
I think, yeah, to the point that we just made, I think that is probably singularly the most important thing, right? No, I don't think any of my friends, especially the guys that aren't creative, I don't think they can understand that like discipline ends up being like the most important thing, or as we're saying now, like that hustle, right? So most of the time it's not necessarily about having the best idea, because after a while you start realizing that you might have one good idea a week, maybe one good idea a month, one good idea a quarter could really take you. You know what I mean? Like that could be the big painting, that could be the one that's exhibiting the most, but it's that kind of hustle in the background, knowing that, okay, it's something that I could be working on. It's something that I could be improving on. It's something that I could be learning about. Having that same consistent drive, I think, in the background ends up being the most important thing, because I might have the best idea for the painting in the world, but after, being at my first job, talking with my family, dealing with everybody like in the city of New York, and then finally being back in my apartment to paint the picture, if I don't have the hustle, like the picture will never get done, like no matter how great the inspiration is. So I think hustle ends up being, I can't say it's exactly the same as creativity, but it's like 51 to 49 on like how the process works. I think hustle is up there.
That's a fact. That's a fact. My mom always asks me, she's like, John, when you gonna come home? What are you doing? And I always tell her like, mom, I make paintings for a living. I mean, for the most of my living, like, I gotta like stay in the studio. I have to like always try to come up with something new, or always, just work, just continue to paint, continue to work on the craft. And I think that's for me. I think that hustle has to like stay there, and it's always been there, and you always have to like keep creating and to figure out where you're gonna go next. So, in addition to your professional role at Newburger, Berman, you juggle a lot of volunteer responsibilities related to your alma mater, Morehouse, within your community as well. On top of all of that, you continue to have your studio practice and you curate exhibitions. How do you find the balance to like juggle all of those different things and still be able to have a successful like studio practice?
Mm. Yeah, I think to the point we both made earlier, I think the hustle ends up being kind of like my de facto answer most of the time. But if I wanted to be more nuanced, I would say I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of got out of that idea of the box of balance, right? So it's gonna sound kind of crazy, but most of the time I hear people saying like, Robert, I feel like you have one of the best like work-life balances, right? Like you have a job that you're interested in, you got your passion or your hobby that you're doing outside of the job, and you got your friends. So, I feel like you just kind of have it all. And when I hear balance, I think people almost like to think about it as like a recipe, like, I got the perfect amount of work and I got the perfect amount of art, and I just want them to level out. And in real life, it ends up being more so just the hustle part. So it's like knowing that there's a thing that I want to do. Am I going to make time for it, and am I okay with doing it? Right. So you mentioned being in the studio all the time. Your mom is looking for you, trying to get you to come home. But at the end of the day, you know that the art is not going to create itself unless you're there, like pushing the brush. And for me, once I got over this idea of balance, meaning like, okay, I need the perfect amount of rest. I need the perfect amount of painting. I need the perfect amount of like doing the thing at work. I need the perfect amount of like social and hanging out. I was able to do a lot more consistently. And I think that's where it ended up working for me. So I'm not worried about the balance, but I'm worried about the doing, right? So that shows up on a day-to-day basis of like, I may only paint for 15 minutes. I may get a day where I'm not doing anything. So I get to paint for, 24, 48 hours at a time. Family may be in town and I may not paint for a week, or work may be busy and I may be doing that for like a month straight and nothing else. But it really just comes back to like, all right, if the canvas is there, like, am I going to get up and do it again? Is it okay to like do the 5 minutes, to 10 minutes, to 15, and then find something else? Or am I really trying to make sure that, again, I have a full-time job? Am I trying to spend like 40 hours doing everything? And then it's like, you try to do it that way. And you realize that it's not enough hours in a week, right? So yeah, I think that's been my experience, just getting used to like finding, call it the margins to work in, knowing that 5 minutes will get you there sometimes, and sometimes you got to just string the 5 minutes together until you can get to like the full hour, and that ends up working just as well. So I got a question for you. So can you talk about your experience in graduate school, and I mean, do you have any advice for students of color or anybody else that may be watching? And can you talk about a little bit for people who might be watching who have transferred to institutions where they've been like more or less historically excluded?
My experience with graduate school was pretty good. It was a pretty good experience for me. Honestly, I was so fresh and really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I think I was coming from Houston. I was just trying to get out of Houston, and I got accepted into the school. I really didn't even know where I was going. I didn't know it was. This probably sounds a little silly, but I didn't even know the school was a private school. I was just like the new kid on the block, and I'm looking around. I'm like, wow, I really am the only black person on campus, or really the only black person like myself from a predominantly black neighborhood. And I think what drove me, I mean, it was that kind of drove me too. That was like the the igniter in me. And I think I wasn't really too concerned about it that much. I just wanted to work. And I felt like, being that we are excluded in those type of institutions, I think the work we put in, you can't, if we put in enough work and really put our passion into it, there's no way we can be excluded. And I think that'll be like some good advice to someone that's applying or trying to go to one of those type of institutions. Not to like focus in on like, okay, we're gonna be excluded. You should just go in, knowing like, basically I'm the shit. Basically, you should have that type of attitude. And excuse my French for that, but I think, yeah, I think that should be like the motive.
Okay.
Um,
Going into it, you're saying that it wasn't even a second thought for you, that there weren't people that looked like you, that you didn't have any connections or anything like that on the inside. You were just going for it because you knew that that was the school that you were interested in.
Honestly, that was the only school that accepted me. So I saw it as my ticket out. So I was just like, man, let me just go take this big leap of faith, going all the way to California. Let me experience some new life. And I just, I just took that. I mean, I didn't notice. I really didn't. It didn't dawn on me that that those situations were taking place at the institutions too. I think I was coming from like an all black school, and everything was so new to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was so fresh into it. I really just didn't even know. I was like, dang, if I could have, I would have just applied to like, I would have brought in my applications for school.
This one always comes up, I know, just because I went to a HBCU and now I'm working in corporate America. So I went from like the all black college to the all white world. What was that like for you, going from like the all black school to the PWI?
You said, what was it like? It was so weird because um, just just being around so many black people my whole life, and then I take this big leap, and it's like, oh, I'm that one, how do I want to put this? I'm like the black dot on the white shirt. Put it like that. I stand out everywhere I go. So it was it was so weird to me, but it also made me feel proud too. I was just like, you know what? One day I'll be able to tell this story to somebody, and they will feel empowered by it. And it just it felt weird, but it empowered me at the same time. I felt good that I even got accepted into the school, and they took a stab. I mean, took a chance with me. All right, so Rob, your portraits often Your portraits often celebrate luminaries from Black culture and history. Can you talk about the need for representation in the art world and why your focus in your work is on these figures? Or are
Yeah,
they?
yeah. I mean, you mentioned the need for representation, and I think that for the, I guess, headline, that's why I like focusing on the luminaries, and it's not always so luminaries, it's a good word, I think, but I think when we hear it, it's always like we think celebrities or historical figures or whatever. But I mean, it's still a good word for me, right? So like a lot of the times the portraits that I'm drawing is not just the portraits I'm painting or drawing. It's not just people that have like a huge historical impact, but the key theme is generally people that have an impact on me. So sometimes it's like family members, sometimes it's historical figures, sometimes it's other artists, well-known or, local art. Uh, and I think it's something, like we just previewed the conversation a little bit. I think it's something that's powerful and almost um, revolutionary for having like a Black face in a space, any space. Um, Whether it's like one person, the only Black person in the room, in a group of like 20 plus, or literally just having like that portrait in the background. Um, and funny enough, like I have a interesting story where I kind of like tested that out a little bit more. Well, if it's 2021 now, it was two summers ago, summer 2019, I was able to curate a exhibition at my job, and I think it might be like less than 5% Black employees at this investment firm that I work at, and they wanted all the employees that were artists to bring in different representations of their work. So I remember thinking in the beginning I could do something that's interesting and vanilla, something that's kind of safe for my coworkers, because I just want them to be interested, and ultimately I want them to buy. I'm like, these people have money, so it's great. But as I got closer to the actual exhibition day, um, I started asking myself, like, what is the one thing that I could put in here that almost would like disrupt the space the most? And I ended up doing like this huge portrait of Nipsey Hussle. And you could, even with the portrait being in the background, even with it being like this very eloquent, like light blue, almost like fade into the wall painting, you could see this thing cut the tension in the room. You could see where people are like huddled up around it on this side, and then everybody else just kind of like going about their business. And how quickly the conversation became either folks that were just like stunned at like who this person was, like who is this Black man like in here with this giant face and this gold chain and tattoos. And I mean, like, it was super detailed, so it's like you see his tattoos on his face, you see the braids coming down, like it's undeniable that this is a Black man like in this office. And it was just important to me because, again, it was a very subtle act, but it's very revolutionary. Like, these people would otherwise not see Black faces or even want to acknowledge like Black stories. So the fact that Nipsey's face was in the space with everybody asking questions, like I was able to walk around like for months after the installation, just, oh yeah, did you know about this rapper? Like, did you know about the work that he was doing? Did you know about any of his music? Did you know about like the stuff that was going on in California? Do you know like the underpinnings of why he actually got shot? Do you think that it was just, Black on Black crimes and it became a living, breathing situation? So um, as much as I can, I'm trying to create Black faces. As much as I can, I'm trying to almost like pollinate those stories and get those into other people, and get the question at least on the table. If folks don't know, like, who is this? And that's like how I end up wanting to share.
Could you see like the disgust on certain people's faces as they walk in the building, like as they try to like turn like a blind eye to it?
I think with art, especially when it comes to all Black art, I've never, maybe I'll say I've almost never seen anybody, especially not Black, be disgusted. There's always, I think, something that even when it's something that they don't want to see, that's still disruptive enough that people are drawn to it. So there was a few people that you could tell confusion is probably the closest I think I saw. Like you could see people getting close to it and being like, well, why is this here? You know, why did they bring this here? Like, why is it on the wall now? Like, why do I have to see this like every day I come into the office? But that was still a smaller percentage. I think most people are still just kind of like, oh my God, like, we've never seen anything like this before. Like, you know, is that really a Black man on a painting? Like, who did this? Whoever would take the time to, you know, and it was the whole other opposite effect. And I think that was something that was more surprising to me. I did think that it was going to be a little bit more of a harsh reaction. Jonah, can you talk about how your work or how you work to represent Black life and represent your community in the different paintings and installations that you've created?
I think I was like really I was drawn to Kerry James Marshall, and I was listening to one of his lectures. And let me just rewind on Kerry James Marshall. The first time I saw his work, I was like, I didn't know it was him. But when I first saw it, I was like, man, who's making these minstrel like type of TV show type of paintings? Who's making these extremely Black like figures? And I was like, I didn't like it at first because I could always see like the pink around the eye, and I was like, oh, that goes back to those shows when white people used to dress up as Black people. I thought somebody was making fun of that, but then finding out it was Kerry James Marshall, and the reason why he was doing it, it led me to like figure out. It led me to want to like investigate how can I do this in my work and like what I was inspired by, and it was just like the scenes I remember um, in my neighborhood and just driving by and seeing certain things and seeing a lack of that in museums, especially in Houston, and just seeing it in any gallery or any show, or just the lack of it. And I was like, man, I really want to, you know, just in case, because galleries are really not that big in my neighborhood in Houston, Texas. And I was like, if I'm gonna make work, I at least have to address like where I come from and have something where the people in my neighborhood and neighborhoods in any city that's like my neighborhood, they can see this work and have a connection to it. And they can feel like, okay, I know exactly what he's talking about. Oh, I know they have like they could see something like an iron or anything, and they be like, oh, okay, I know what that means, or I know what he was hinting at, and they have a connection to it. So having that representation or just painting things dealing with the Black subject, it just made me want to put that in my work even more.
So you talked a little bit about the I guess that coded language. Can you talk or elaborate some more on how you use either language or just kind of like the different symbols in your work to give shout outs to the people around you or to your hood?
Oh yeah, the coded language. That's something that's really big in my work too. I love having like the coded language, and I think that goes back to like uh, during slavery times. Like even through songs, we had the codes in the songs, and now we have a coded way we speak. We could say certain things like F12, and that can mean anything to somebody, but that means like F the police. And you know, I try to do like I specifically take that slogan and I throw that on like a domino, and I have like the domino like the big six, and I say F12 with the big six, and that's like my code with that. And just having that coded language is, I think that's history. And I think I'm gonna mess this up. W.B. Du Bois, he has a quote saying, "Always seeing oneself through the eyes of another." And I think that's something that plays a big role in my work too. I hope I'm not misquoting that, but it's something like that. It's in that nature, and I think that that plays a big role, having that coded language in my work.
Yeah, I was listening to something maybe a few days ago, just talking about how empathy works and trying to like bring people together. And somebody was just going in on like the Black story, the Black narrative, and how coded language has always been a part of our, call it like American existence, right? The
Right.
fact that we've always had to have a keen understanding of the people who were other to us, but like so that we can change our actions, hide our actions, be more amenable with our actions, but also staying authentic in a way that we were able to inform each other, whether that was through the songs, giving the maps out for like how to go to the Underground Railroad, or even just like you said, smiling in people's faces and saying things that was just flat out insults, but it meant nothing to them. So they had no reason to investigate it. So I think personally also like look for ways to just hide different codes into the work, such that when it finishes, it is something more or less nice, interesting, and eloquent to look at. But to the person that again is a little bit closer to my audience, they'll understand where we're actually referencing. Okay, yeah, that's nice.
Thank you. Oh, Rob, you have created several outreach programs like Words of on White, the Silent Renaissance, that really bring art into spaces. What do you think is the importance of these movements in the community, and what is the impact?
I think when I think about, I guess, my discipline or my practice as an artist, the objective for me, or like my mission, is just communicating ideas. So I got into, I guess, programming, organizing, curating, pulling people together, because I kept coming back to the question like, well, how can I communicate the idea a little bit better? Or what are some of like the overarching themes, right? So I know if it's me painting a series or coming up with my own like solo exhibition, that's me exploring an idea in detail. But for whatever reason, like I'll do that type of work and still present my work to other people, but I'm less interested in it because I, I'm me, I guess, right? So I know that if I do one painting and I sit there next to it and talk to people, I can go on and on and on about my ideas for ad nauseum. But I know if it's my idea right here and 10 other people with their idea, but we're all kind of singing the same chords, um, now I know that it's harder for somebody to come into the space and leave without thinking Black Lives Matter, for example, right? Because they're gonna get it from somebody on that wall, right, before they leave. Uh, so I mean, throughout when I started thinking about my art like that, about the importance of, I guess, the education piece, right? And knowing that by myself I could have an impact, but not necessarily not as much breadth. Um, or at least not this early in my, call it, art career. Like it's not it's not millions of people that are interested in like all my paintings, but I know getting that breadth ends up coming around like once we bring more people together, once we have those bigger group exhibitions, once we spend that time like creating and curating those spaces for folks. I could not speak completely to the impact of all those different initiatives just yet, but um, from a very personal standpoint, I could say that it's been huge. So like the artists that I've been able to work with for the past 4 or 5 years, like some of the best practitioners, whether it's been dancers or directors or producers, have come from different community outreach situations via Words on White, or if I'm looking for inspiration now on a piece, that comes from artists that I've worked with via Silent Renaissance, folks that I've like literally exhibited work like side by side with before, and just continuing to like get to those underlying messages. So when we talk about like the coded language, even the art, even the exhibit, like to me symbolic of like the actual conversation or idea that we all want to have, right? So I think the impact on the broader community has been one that I don't know, it's hard to describe. I guess like it's just been like a teaching and learning community. And that's been something that since pretty much like the beginning of me becoming more or less professional as an artist, that's been something that's been central. Just having that community of people that are wanting to create together, wanting to learn together, and then ultimately like hoping to teach together.
Would you say that's what sparked you to start those outreach programs?
Yeah, I mean, it's because I think there's a part of me that really is interested in getting my artwork out there, that wants people to see the portraits and paintings and all the stuff that I do. But there's something more, I always tell people like I'm the laziest hardworking person in the world, because deep down in my heart, I'm like, if there was somebody else that could do it like this, then I would stop. I would stop. Like I wouldn't care anymore. You know, if it was one person that I knew that I could count on, like, nah, this person, they gonna make sure that they gonna represent. Like everybody gonna know about hip hop. Everybody gonna know about Black people. Like when I come in, it's not gonna be no people that look at me crazy anymore. I stop. I just watch TV. I'd be fine. I'd much rather just paint in my room and like not deal with anybody. But then I wake up the next day and I'm like, oh, well, I don't know that person yet. So what do? I'm like, well, I could try to be him, but I could go find the other person. So if I find them and then bring like 10 of us in the room, then one of us got to be the person that's going to like help teach or push this thing along. And I realized, I guess it's just always a spirit of collaboration, because I know like I may only have one piece of the story. I may have one sentence of the page. I may have one chapter of the book, but again, with all of us together, we might be able to actually get the message across, get enough people to watch, hit that scale to where now somebody actually is inspired, and then I could quit. I could retire. I don't have to do it no more. So questions for you. Can you talk about your experience returning to the Third Ward? And can you talk about that specifically in terms of what that meant during the pandemic, what that meant like post George Floyd? Yeah, I'll start there. What was it like going back to the Third Ward?
It was interesting. I went back the day after Mother's Day, and I went back. I went there in the midst of the pandemic. It was fun, and then my birthday came, and then 5 days later, George Floyd passed, and then I was like, I sat there on the porch and I watched the video like everybody else did, and then I was looking at him. I was like, man, he looked familiar. I seen him somewhere, and then come to find out, this is like someone that is like really close in my circle, and he's like the big brother to like a lot of people in my circle, or kind of like my friends' friends, some of my friends' big friends, and it was crazy. It was just like one of the wildest things. I knew if that was to happen in Houston instead of Minnesota, Houston would have been a war zone probably, just because of like where George Floyd is from and where he used to hang, which is basically like one of the toughest neighborhoods in Third Ward, like inner neighborhoods or inner projects in neighborhood. I mean, inner projects in Third Ward, and I just knew it would have been crazy, and it kind of hit me close, because then I realized that was like my friend's uncle, and then days later, it was someone on Facebook and Instagram asking that they needed help with a George Floyd mural, and it went viral. And I told her, I was like, look, I'm from Third Ward. This building is going to be what she's doing. The mural is going to be in Third Ward. I was like, I got to be on it, because I'm actually from the city. I know a few people that I know his relatives, and I was like, I got to be on this. It's no way around it. And it was a crazy experience, but it was a good experience too, because I got to see like unity, and I got to see like people share their stories and share their stories about George. They really knew him while I was painting. I mean, I only had like one section on the wall, and that was to put up how we throw up Third Ward, and I was able to put the hood up on the wall instead of his face, because it was all sectioned in little pieces, but it all ended up coming together. But it was crazy. I actually have to go home Wednesday, and my high school, same high school that George Floyd went to, they had me design a Black Lives Matter mural for the ground, like the ones that's being done in DC, that were done in DC and all over. So I have to do one of those in the middle of the street. I'm looking forward to doing it, but it's such a big mural. I'm not looking forward to doing it, but it is a memorial for George Floyd, and his family will be out there, and it'll be a big cause. So I know that's kind of off topic, but a little on topic too. But it was a good experience.
Something I add on to that, or that I'm curious about rather, is I guess, how do you feel in the midst of what seems like the end of the world, like this pandemic, social justice, unrest, and I couldn't even say like all the other stuff that was going on in 2020. Was there ever a time you felt like, okay, I need to be doing something other than art?
Just my spirit. It's like I feel like if I wasn't doing art, I'd probably be an activist, a serious activist, and I felt like I was like, man, I really want people to listen to me. I want people to gather around me. Let's push unity. And I think that's what me putting the hood on the wall, that painting, it wasn't just like the hood being on the wall. I was kind of having like some coded language with my dominoes. I spelled out, I put this on the wall, but I had dominoes spelling like an A, like the dominoes coming together like this, like kind of like making out an A, and I had a R and I had a D, and it basically uh, was saying third ward. But with the dominoes, I was trying to say like we can build together. If we lean against each other, we can hold each other up to to do what we need to do to be able to. Because when dominoes come together, that's usually in the game of domino. That's when things add up, and that's when you start to like multiply. And I was saying that, and I made the dominoes red, black, and green. So I was saying in this community, we could hold each other up. And I think, yeah, if I wasn't doing the painting, other than paintings, I probably would be trying to like, unify us, even though I'm doing it in the paintings, trying to. But if I wasn't, I have a microphone walking down the street with my speaker, like, come on, y'all, we gotta get this together. Or, just trying to stop certain things going on in the neighborhood, which could lift us up.
I mean, we just came out of like one of the most impactful years of probably our lifetime, for sure. How did 2020, if at all, change your practice? How did it impact the work that you did?
I think before the pandemic, I was talking about like Black life and how Black lives matter. And I mean, it really didn't, it just enhanced it. It just enhanced like what I wanted to talk about. And it led me to really to try to get more creative in that topic, and how can I not be so cliche with the work. So trying to figure out how can I be creative and not, yeah, I'm trying not to say the same thing, but yeah, just trying to be more creative with that subject matter. And yeah. What about you?
Yeah, so 2020, very similar to what you said. Like I was already working on a lot of called like Black Power pieces. Like I started the year with like a Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Frederick Douglass, like all these just Black figures going into, Black History Month exhibitions and stuff that I was doing last year. And then all of a sudden, the world stopped, and we ended up getting locked at home, and then George Floyd and everything else. And I think for the first time in a long time, it made me, in a very scary way, like more conscious of my work. Because it wasn't like there were more eyes on it or that I got anything like of it from it as a result of, like, I don't even know how to put it, but I think seeing everybody being at home and able to like work on art or able to do something that I felt like was personally like therapeutic, and maybe even meditative, right? Like as we were going through such a hectic year, I felt like, this is an outlet that I have that is helping me to kind of go through this whole situation. But maybe last April or May, it really started to click that there's a piece of the discipline that actually is like not just storytelling from like my personal story, but how much of this am I supposed to be storytelling on behalf of like other people? How much of this should I be given to like the community around me? So like I always create for the community, but how much of this am I supposed to be a witness to? And I think that question and from that thought process, like towards the middle and end of the year, like I really tried to tell not just my story, but again, highlight the stories of folks around me a lot more, because again, I started realizing like where my story had taken me, the things that I had gotten exposed to. And then now, especially because like I'm in New York, but I'm in Harlem, right? So I work in financial services, which is one New York City. And then I live in Harlem, across from the projects, which is the second New York City. So everybody that lives in the finance world that had to work from home was super comfortable. I'm getting on these Zoom calls. There are people that are like, calling in from the Poconos. I'm calling in from my house up in, the Hamptons or something like that. And it was very strange to see people literally living a different existence and then walking outside to the corner store and seeing people that, I knew just lost their job, or I knew couldn't get like groceries, or that couldn't get a mask for like the first 3 or 4 weeks, or we're still trying to get services. So it just became a whole different, a level of, I think, connectivity for me for 2020. It really just made me like a lot closer to my work, and like some of the stuff that I was trying to say or show.
Being that we're so used to like being in our own artistic realm, and we're used to like being to ourselves and seeing people that are so used to being around people and them having to like come back and be in shelter, and see that was kind of shocking too. It was a shock to me. So it just like, dang, I have an outlet. A lot of people don't have an outlet, and or they used to have an outlet and they don't really have it anymore. And to see that, it kind of like made me want to like engage with my work a little bit more and figure out like what type of messages can I put into the work that can engage them.
Yeah, not that all. In your experience, how can public art serve as a source for activism and healing? I know you spoke about how the mural ended up incorporating a lot of the messaging from the Third Ward. So maybe you could dive into that a little bit more. Like, what was some of the feedback that you got from that?
I'm replaying like a scene when I was on the wall, and it was like somebody passed by. It was several people that passed by. They would just roll down their window. They were like, yeah, yeah, just to see how like happy they were to see the community come together and put something so beautiful on the wall, and just to see a representation like of themselves on the wall too. Just seeing the hood up on the wall, seeing like, even though this was a sad event that took a tragic event that took place, but seeing something beautiful that come out of it and see like the community come together. Just, I think for some people, it gives them hope that there is unity in the future somewhere, and unity is taking place somewhere, and it could take place. I think it was so many great moments just seeing people like pass by and be so happy to see George Floyd on the wall, and people share their stories about George Floyd. I was going to ask you, how did you feel about the how can public art serve as a source for you as well as activism and healing?
Yeah, I think that public art ends up being we've kind of overused the word inspiration, I guess, but like the spark, right? And in spaces that are normally, to me, kind of stagnant. I mentioned earlier exhibition I was able to curate in my office. And I think that ended up being like a really good example because for like how public art or how public creativity can serve as like this healing and activism. When I took that portrait in of Nipsey Hussle, I want to say it was like maybe a few months after he had passed away, right? And I mentioned that the population of Black and people of color at my office is like less than 5%, but it was something crazy, like nuts that happened after they saw this painting in our like corporate headquarter building, right? I started having like Black coworkers coming up to me like literally in tears uh, because one, I was not the biggest Nipsey Hussle fan. I'm not saying I wasn't a fan. I mean, like when I saw people's reactions, I realized that I thought I was fan number one, but it was some people that were like that were up there compared to like where I was, right? So being able to just see their reactions showed me like, all right, this is a thing. Like there's some energy that's being moved around here. It's not just like me working on canvas or people looking and just kind of admiring it for the aesthetic sake, right? Two, I remember people coming up and reacting to me almost like viscerally because they just couldn't believe that there's like something so kind of big and in your face and it was so Black in this predominantly white space. So um, even the conversation around that, like people seeing it on like the floor that it was installed on, coming to my floor to find me, and then us all having the conversation afterwards with, you know, the coworker that sits next to me that didn't know about the art, the coworker that knew about the art that had no idea like what I do on a normal basis, and then me in the middle, all of us having the conversation around Black art, Black lives, like Black violence, Black communities, like so on and so forth. It just became like this story that kept going on and on and on. And it did. Like there were more people that continued to see the art. I think there was a reporter that came into the building and saw it and ended up pushing the story further, right? So being able to see that, I was able to, I think, get a better appreciation for like how the art in public spaces can really, really like transmute emotions in ways that the stuff in like my background can't really do right now. So yeah, and I think it's like hugely important. I was able to see in Harlem, like they put a few streets down the block from where I stay, they had one of the huge Black Lives Matter murals as well. Unfortunately, it's kind of like run down and worn out a bit now because they took the barricades down or whatever. But while it was up, and I remember being there for like the 2 or 3 days while they were painting it, it was that same example played out again. Like you see the people that just a month earlier were literally ready to like burn down the blocks. We're literally ready to like riot and just tear everything down to remind folks that we were still here, right? But then this Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday of them just like having the street blocked off and people being out there being able to paint, it was literally like watching, I don't know, like an art festival. It was hard. It was surreal because like I couldn't pull away from like, okay, we're watching this in the news. This is happening. This is why they're doing it. But then actually seeing what they were doing, it looked like a normal summer day. It looked like a block party. They're having a great time. And yeah, it was just crazy to see again, like how the art was the switch, right?
I think that segues like good into our next question. How does your practice work to change entrenched cultural narratives that continue to exclude artists of color, particularly Black or hip hop artists?
I think for me, that's it's kind of like some easy answers. Some with the people that I'm painting, the people that I try to portray in the work. Kendrick Lamar or Nipsey, and make their face, you know, giant for folks. And I think that's where I'm trying to like continue the story more. But as of lately, and especially like after last year, I've began to add in a little bit more time in my call it research process. And I'm starting to find, I guess, stories that are radical in ways outside of just my personal palette. That's the best way to say it, right? Or the best way I could think about it right now. For example, there were James Baldwin is a good example. He's an artist that I paint all the time, and we wouldn't necessarily think about him as hip hop, but he was like a big figure like around the world, but especially here in New York and in Harlem. And I think about how important intersectionality is in telling those stories, or in like the activism piece, and how I'm like a Black person that grew up, born and raised in the South, and I'm like, okay, I know Black people understand what Black Lives Matters means, but then when we start having things like Pride Month, or we want to talk about like the LGBTQ community, it ends up being like more of a riff. And then Black people, especially like around the Bible Belt, are like, wait a minute, what? No, we don't do none of that. Like, that's a whole, we understand why they discriminate against them. It's like, we can't, that's not the point of me putting up like the Nipsey wasn't so like we could like adopt one image and then discard all the rest. The point of me putting up Nipsey is so I could put up Nipsey, James Baldwin, J. Cole, and then like continue on so somebody can see all of them together. So I think the practice has changed such that like I'm not just I'm getting more comfortable telling stories that I'm uncomfortable with. That's the best way I could say it. Yeah, I'm getting more okay with researching things that are outside of my daily understanding, or even like my daily environment. So I'm reaching a little bit more.
I think that pushes the work too. It's like you get to tap into like a realm you're really not that familiar with, and it shows in the work too. I think that's a good thing to do.
Every time I do one of those reaches, it almost draws somebody else in that is a lot different, and then they push again, right? So I think I did early last year maybe 2 different portraits of James Baldwin, and then somebody else came back and said, well, have you ever thought about doing like Bayard Rustin, for example? And then that became another situation where I'm like, well, who is this guy? Like, why is he, relevant? Why did he come up after I did this picture and that picture? And then literally within like another month and a half, somebody saw the Bayard picture and they sent me the picture of like him, Baldwin, and King all together. I'm like, I've never seen these pictures, or I've never seen this man in the background, and so on and so forth. So I think it ends up being like this virtuous cycle. I push a little bit, then somebody else pushes more, then I push a little bit more, then somebody else catches it, and they're like, well. So it's that's how my practice has changed. That's how it's been beneficial to me, and that's how like I try to kind of like keep those Black artists in conversation, in the story. And I mean, I said earlier too, I do have a lot of luminaries in my work, but I always try to make sure there is there's somebody close at hand. So I'm like, these are the artists that I'm like drawing inspiration from, or the stories that I'm drawing inspiration from. But then I always try and go back to like my local surroundings. So it's like, what other artists that are right here that I could like do a portrait of, whether it's like my sister or my mom or something like that. Yeah. So what about you? How do you how does your work change to incorporate more Black stories, more hip hop, more music?
It's always so random, but it I did a Nipsey piece too because I felt connected with him as well. And recently I just did an MF Doom piece, and I really wasn't trying to do a Doom piece because I felt like he just passed away, and I really try to sway away from doing portraits of people that just passed, or just dive right into those portrait making right after somebody passed. But doing him it was a good, I had a good time doing it, and I felt like connected to it. And I was just doodling, and somehow the face popped up, and I was like, I gotta do Doom. I see him already, so it's like I gotta just put him in. And just keeping those, I was just trying to find my way, find like a way I can tell that story and be creative with it. And I think I was so drawn to the word entrenched. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's where the word trenches come from. Like, you know how some people we say like, oh, we're from the trenches. I was like, okay. So just that word in trenches is like trying to keep the trenches in my work too, and keep that connection in the work. Yes. The next question: how can we hold institutions of American art accountable to include Black artists in the story and legacy of American art?
To me, it's two answers, and the first one is deeply personal. So like, because I do so many, call it outside work activities and entrepreneurial endeavors, I'm like, the number one way to hold American institutions, uh, accountable for all of this, create more Black ones. Full stop. That's why I'm like, anywhere we can, like if there are situations where uh, more Black artists can come together and tell stories, that's always going to be the first thing I'm telling folks. Like, it's not, we as an artist, especially as like somebody that curates and puts together exhibitions, I know that it's something sexy, I think, about wanting to be at the MoMA, something like extremely enticing about wanting to be, front and center at the Met. But Basquiat painted on walls, right? That's how we found out who he was. He did a lot of painting for free and on walls. And then when people figured out who he was, then they started painting around him. And then they brought him in. But I say that to say, like, we could create our own. It's a lot of situations. Just keeping with Basquiat, like, I think that one of the most famous shows, like him and a lot of his contemporaries did, like out in Times Square, is another just great situation of artists just coming together to spread their message. Like, you don't necessarily need the institution or the building or the $1 million grant to create this thing. Like, our job is creativity, our profession, so to speak, right? But I mean, on the other hand, I think it's being somebody that does have like the 9-to-5 corporate life, right? I think there's a lot of ways. Like, it's as much as you can, like, advocating, in these institutions, going in there, like if you're a member, like telling them like, this is something that I'm looking forward to seeing. Like, why don't you all have this? Like, this is an artist you all should be displaying. Like, and it's similar, I think, a similar mindset of voting. One person saying it might not matter, but if every single person in the third ward went to the closest gallery or institution and was like, what the fuck is this? Like, excuse my French, what is this? I need more people like this. I think they would be responsive. I think that's what it is. You just need people saying like, this is what I'm patronizing and this is why I'm patronizing. I'm not patronizing it to learn about other folks. I want to see my stuff represented in here. So I think the two answers end up being like, create your own and then try and like draw people to it so the art lives, and then otherwise like advocate, like really get in there, like talk to the people who are curating, talk to the people who are giving the tours, talk to the people who are on the boards, donate money where they do a good job at. So again, if in New York, like the Brooklyn Museum is a pretty good just standalone institution. It always has like Black art. The Schomburg is a museum or like research institution that always has Black art. So for me, that's who I donate money to. Those are going to be the folks that like continue to get the actual institutional support. And I think it's just about having like that type of intentionality, like knowing where you put your resources at, knowing that you have a voice and can speak up, and then afterwards knowing that you have some agency and knowing that you can create. What about you? I mean, how do you find yourself like holding these institutions accountable?
Oh man, I question myself about that every time I go to Houston and I go to the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston, and I get so frustrated every time I go to this specific building. It's like the main the main building at this museum, and it's like I go upstairs and they can have like, it's huge. It's just like a bunch of rooms of just classical art. And I'm just like, man, when is this gonna go away? Like, if we can at least put it in storage for at least a couple years, because it's been up there for so many years. It's like, when is that gonna like not die out? I'm not saying the history has to go away, but I mean, really though, what are the stories really telling? And like, what are these stories about? And it's like, it has to be a change in there. They can't just keep those paintings up. I mean, they can do whatever they want, but I get so frustrated every time I go in there. I'm just like, man, this is so dated, and it's only drawing a specific crowd there. It's like, I feel like if there was, I want to hold them accountable. I want to do what you said and actually go in there and not go crazy, but kind of like talk to someone and be like, man, come on, like we at least need some representation here somewhere.
Yeah, you just take the pink painting, you just throw it on the wall, and so we don't see it anymore.
There's so many of them, though. It drives me insane.
Yeah.
I think doing, and like you said, doing for self too, like having our own shows, or holding ourselves accountable and putting our money into places that have they have our representation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Like the advocating piece ends up being, I'll say, easier said than done, right? But in New York, it ends up being a big, I want to say like avenue, just because because New York is unique in that it has so many cultural institutions. A lot of them are connected, and most of the time people are going to show up one way or another. But I think it's almost like obvious to see like the amount of people that show up for like a Whitney biennial show, because they do incorporate more people of color. They do have like a lot more modern art versus what we may see at the Metropolitan. Like the Met only has like big crowds when again, they bring in a new exhibition. So I think as people start to see which ones are the more interesting ones, when they see like this is what brings the crowds out, they start to change. I know like Brooklyn Museum has been doing a great job with like they do these programs called like First Saturdays, where they literally just turn the museum into a party every month. And the amount of like just foot traffic they get from that is just it's insane. It's insane. And I've started to see like more museums adopt that model as well. So I think that the advocating piece is big, but again, I understand that it depends on like where you are and like how well folks are able to do that.
Right. I probably would be the only guy that's tripping in Houston. I don't think nobody else has a problem with it, because I don't see nobody else talking about it. Are there any artists or creatives that you recommend? What other creative media do you watch, read, listen to for inspiration, or listen
to? Artists that I would recommend. Visual artists. Yeah, it's. I'll probably come up with like 2 or 3 and throw in a few more towards the end. But like the first one that comes to mind on visual artists is Kahinde Wiley. I want to say he's born in LA, or maybe he's from I think he's from California, or at least educated out there. And in terms of like inspiration for me, he ends up being probably like one of the biggest sources. His paintings are very flamboyantly colored, very brilliant pictures, very, very, very large scale works. So I think it's something awe-inspiring about that, especially because this guy's always doing like these Black images. And I appreciate the fact that I think I've even seen him say this like in articles, where he tries his best to create like these eloquent images to have almost like the most not even absurd, but just kind of like very in your face conversations, right? Most people know him from like his work that he did with Obama for the National Portrait Gallery. if anybody was in New York for like the past year and a half, you might have saw he did this statue that was in Times Square for like maybe 4 months called Rumors of War. And it's literally like this black man on this giant horse. And when I say this statue was big, like it was the biggest thing in Times Square for 4 months. It was huge. And yeah, so anyway, favorite visual artist, I always recommend him. In terms of listening, it's a new artist that I don't think he's that new, but new compared to like maybe Drake or somebody. But his name is Kota the Friend, Kota the Friend. This guy's like from Brooklyn. He's a rapper, more like in the hip hop vein as opposed to like the straight rap. And I think he's been very inspiring because he's a relatively young dude. I want to say he's like 24, 25 now. I think he has like one son, and in all his music, he just literally talks about like having a kid, being from Brooklyn, and wanting better stuff for the Black community. So it's like you have a 26-year-old or 25-year-old. He tells stories like he's somebody's like uncle or grandfather. But it's a solid dude. I appreciate him. Yeah, so that's who I always go to in terms of visuals for inspiration, and that's what I'm listening to now. Those are my recommendations. What about you? Anybody? I guess I did listening and visual arts. What about you? Do you have a visual artist you could recommend? And what about reading? What about any authors you would recommend?
Yeah, definitely. I got some authors. Man, I was sitting here thinking of my artists the whole time you were talking, and I'm still not ready. Nah, I think a visual art. I start with my visual artist. A visual artist, one of my favorites. I would have to go with. Man, I got a lot of favorites. Right now, my favorite is a performance artist, and his name is Daniel T. Gator Lomack. I know that's like a long name, but you can look him up. He's a performance artist, conceptual performance artist, and he's pretty dope, man. His performances are amazing. He does some assemblage work. Another artist that I think we probably all know is Kerry James. I'm gonna go with Kerry James Marshall. Gotta go with him. It's just the way he paints and the elegance in his work and just the colors, the way everything is so tight and together. It really inspires me. Um, let's see, music. What am I listening to for inspiration? I listen to so much. I listen to so many songs, albums. I think right now I've been moving around so much. I have to go with Conway the Machine. It's he's a rapper, and the way he just puts words together, his lyrics and just the beats, how everything just meshes together, it just inspires me. Not really so the message, because I never really just lived that life, but the way his wordplay is amazing. That inspires me a lot. So Conway the Machine, and author I'm currently reading is Elijah Muhammad. And I think that's been really inspiring to me right now. And his message and what he provided for Black people is truly inspiring to me. I think he's an awesome author and Black um, activist. Was a Black, was a good activist.
I feel like we might have talked about this already, but outside of art, I'll make it a little bit more challenging. Outside of art, how do you prioritize time for self-care and mental health in your life?
Man, somebody asked me this, and I was like, "Dang, what is?" I don't know if I really do self care a lot. I think self care is. I think to me, self care is. I give you what I think self care is. I think it's like me taking the time out to like edge myself up, cut my hair. Um, but anything other than that, man, I don't really do too much self care. I think after I do this mural for my high school, I think I'm gonna actually take a vacation, and that'll be my first time actually, taking a stab at like self care. I'm gonna probably go to a beach and just lay out. I don't even care about the virus right about now. I just need a vacation. So yeah, man. What about you?
The biggest thing I think I do in terms of like self-care is probably be talking to family, but really just like, even it could be friends, family, coworkers. It's just like anybody I can have like an engaging conversation with. Um, Usually I don't care too much about what the subject matter is, but um, I'm a person, I'm opinionated. I like to argue. If I heard a little bit about it, I think I know all of it. So if somebody, if I just watch a documentary about like Bitcoin, I'll be on the phone arguing with somebody like I'm a Bitcoin expert. So uh, that's one thing. Like anytime I can get kind of lost in conversation and ideas with people, I feel like that's something that restores me a lot. And I don't know, taking time to like be still. So not necessarily, I don't have to like go too many places or be on vacation or anything, but sometimes it's like super intentional, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes to sit down and just meditate, or otherwise just being able to just turn everything off for a second. It doesn't happen all the time and it probably could happen more, but right now it's like good conversation and taking a second to unplug. I think that's how I self-care outside of art.
And also working out as well, and praying. I think that's like my self care for me. Just thinking about that.
It's hard. That's why I threw the, outside of art one in there, because really the art ends up being such a big one for me that definitely like having the conversations, definitely like the meditating. But if it's more than like maybe 4 or 5 days without painting, I can feel that. I can actually feel like my body going like, what is happening? Like it's just like sloggy and jerky and anxious and just like so that ends up usually being like full stop, that's the one. And I know like when I got a Art Jones just like in my bones for a few days, but yeah, I think outside of that it's gonna be like just connecting with friends and family. Last question for you, and I think this one might be 2 parts. The Hip Hop Studies Summit was built on KRS-One's idea that all pillars of hip hop lead to and culminate in knowledge of self. What have you learned about yourself through hip hop?
Man, I've learned so much through hip hop. I think being that my father raised me like on a lot of like early like '90s rap, and being that he was like during that time he was like super like quote unquote woke, and he was listening to people like KRS-One, and he was listening to the Brand Nubians and uh, thinking about I'm blanking on different artists, but he was listening to so many artists that were putting in the message in the raps, and at the time I didn't really like it, but now like going back to it and that I'm reading certain things and I hear it in the music and I see it in the books, and I'm like, okay, this really has a like influence on me, and it really teaches me that knowledge of self. I think sometimes so it just gives a little bit of flavor to it. It just has those beats to it, and I think that's the way it hits me through like the music. What about you?
I mean, I think over time, the biggest thing I've learned about myself through hip hop is that I think that it's okay to like be different, and it's kind of weird to say because it's like knowledge of self. Like I've learned, of course, more about myself through listening to music, through listening to hip hop, but I think hip hop in particular has really kind of opened up my eyes to this idea that Black people aren't a monolith. Like it comes up all the time. Like I went to HBCU, like I get that, all of us aren't the same, but just being able to like hear the music, go through these stories. For me, it's almost like anthropology, right? Like being able to hear the different ways that they use language, being able to hear the different ways they express emotions, even as we started, and I think I credit a lot of this to like a lot of our modern hip hop artists. People are just different. Like in the early, call it 80s and 90s, even in a few situations, like maybe let's say New Orleans and like bounce music, for example, like you get these extremely easy templates that people are filling out and like continuing to make music. But I want to say like late 90s, early 2000s, then you start getting artists like Drake, and then you start getting artists like Wayne, and then you start getting all these folks that are like, you know, I'm really just going to go with it, right? I'm really going to bring you who I am, how I want this to sound, like what I want it to look like, how I want the art to be. For me, that kind of like just let me know like, all right, there's a lot of me that's still like kind of left to explore, one, and two, it's a lot more fluid than I think. Like we got artists like Lil Wayne. I think he's an interesting example because he's like so prolific. And we remember like he was one image particularly for like the first 10 or 15 years of his career. And then after that 15-year mark, like after he had got all the trophies and accolades according to like this one Lil Wayne, it became a switch. It became a switch. It became a pivot. It became a pivot. And he was always a little bit ahead of his time, I think. But then 5-10 years after like each one of those switches that he did, he ended up defining like a whole new type of music or a type of hip hop. So I think biggest thing I've ever learned from like hip hop industry, hip hop music, hip hop art is that it's really just about like understanding who you are and then being okay with expressing that. And I think that's it.
What a great conversation, you guys. Thank you so much. I so appreciate that you both spoke of your processes and respective practices, and the way that art can be a catalyst for community dialogue and change, I think is really critical and such an important message. And I appreciate that both of you, you really embrace, or you have a sense of responsibility to reflect Black life, Black joy, and Black activism. So I applaud you both. I think it's really incredible. So what a generative, beautiful conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Hit us up at chaffeyhiphopsummit@gmail.com. If you're on Instagram, follow us at chaffeyhiphop.
You can follow me on Instagram at Jonah.Elijah, Jonah Elijah. And my website is jonahelijah.art.
And if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, my name is Rob Newman III. So follow me at ROBNEWMANIII. That's for Instagram. And I think it's the same for all of my social media platform, actually. And my website is robart.com, spelled a little differently. It's RXBART.com.